Hello, everybody. Good morning. Hope you guys are doing well on this Wednesday. We're in the middle of the week now. Going to get another injury report later today. But as you guys know, since the Seahawks did not play a game this week, we don't necessarily have as much as we usually do to talk about. So, like I said in yesterday's morning video, we're going to mix things up a little bit. We're going to do some deep dives on Pro Football Focus with some of the Seahawks' best players. And yesterday we did Sam Darnold, and I think that's obviously the most important one because Sam Darnold is pretty polarizing in the fan base right now, and also he's the quarterback, and there's just way more stuff you can get into when it comes to a quarterback, especially on Pro Football Focus. But I wanted to go ahead and do this video next. We're going to be talking about Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive here. He's not controversial, but it is a season worth celebrating, so let's get into it. All right, everybody, before we go any further into the video, I want to take a minute to tell you guys about a wonderful app called Sleeper, a one-stop shop for all your sports needs. You can celebrate and chat about sports in real time with other users. You can get all kinds of scores, sports news, and sports alerts with blazing fast speed. And of course, you can play in fantasy leagues and win real money on picks contests. So enjoy sports with other people in a community. Download the Sleeper app today and remember to use the promo code SBN, that is SBN, for up to $100 match on your first deposit. And they also have a free $20 entry right now, no deposit required. So pair those two up. Terms and conditions do apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 25 states and growing. Check out the Sleeper app and have fun with sports this year. All right, so obviously JSN, I think we all have general agreement that he's the best player on the Seahawks right now, and he's been our best player this season. At the very least, he is the player getting the most positive press. He might win Offensive Player of the Year. He is considered by many to be the best receiver in the league right now, and that's obviously worth celebrating on its own. But let's take a look at some of the deep dive stuff on Pro Football Focus as it regards to receivers, because I think we all know the top line stuff. He almost had 120 catches. He had almost 1,800 yards. If you add in rushing yards, he had well over 1,800 actually. 10 touchdowns. Greatest season by any Seahawks wide receiver by a pretty wide margin. And I mean, he absolutely slayed it, and he did it on an offense that didn't even throw the ball that much this year. We threw the ball less than almost every other team. I think only like Baltimore and Philly, maybe. I think those are the two teams that threw it less than we did, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But we're right near the bottom for sure. And let's see what JSN was able to do despite that. So, first of all, top level stuff, just very basic offensive grade for JSN. Number 2 at his position. The only receiver that was graded higher this year by Pro Football Focus was Puka. And you go down the categories, you can see one of the reasons why he was docked a little bit on his grade were the fumbles. He had 3 fumbles this year, but really he only had 1 because one of the fumbles was a lateral pass where he was trying to do a trick play and the ball flew out of bounds. So that counts as a fumble, but it's not really a fumble in the same way that an actual fumble is. And then he had another one that he got punched out right as he was going out of bounds and the ball immediately went out of bounds. It didn't really mean anything. So that's like the one area that they identified JSN not doing everything perfectly in. But again, even that I think is a little bit misleading. He only really had 1 fumble this year. The others were nothing. Now, we're going to have to do a lot of scrolling in this video, by the way, up and down, because we got to go through the list and then come back up to take a look at where JSN is, because obviously he's going to be up pretty high in most of these categories. The most interesting thing about JSN season to me is how much he became a full-time wide receiver rather than a slot receiver. And I want to illustrate that point here. If you sort by total number of slot snaps for every receiver that had at least 90, what would this be, 91 targets? That was our cutoff, 91. You will see that JSN is actually really far down the list. In fact, he's 25th on this list with 113 slot snaps. So, despite being the most productive receiver in football, there were 24 players that lined up in the slot more than JSN. And a lot of these guys, they obviously played fewer games than JSN, although, in fairness, JSN played fewer snaps than a lot of these guys because Seattle was winning by blowouts in some of their second halves. So it's not 100% solid, but it's very solid. If you go by slot percentage, you'll also see that of these high volume targets, JSN is closer to the bottom than he is to the top. He's 23rd in slot percentage, 21.5, right down here with Jalen Waddle, Nico Collins, Tet McMillan, Jamison Williams, who shares a team with Amon-Ra St. Brown, where obviously you don't get to line up in the slot that much. So, however you want to slice it, JSN's really abandoned that slot this season. You sort the league by wide receiver snaps, which is, of course, snaps where the receiver actually lines up wide. JSN, he's not super high. He's 12th with just over 400. And if you sort by percentage, he's also 10th at 76.8%. So he's not the most utilized wide receiver in the league, but he is up there in the top half of the high volume targets by a wide margin. So JSN absolutely has redefined himself as a player in 2025. And without that, there's no way Seattle is where they are right now. There's just no way. All right. I want to take a look at some yak stuff here real quick. I want to take a look at how JSN did compared to other receivers in terms of yak. Now, in terms of the volume, it's obviously very good. 5th best in the NFL in terms of yak, 529 yards after catch. If you go by yards per or yak per reception, it is a little bit less impressive. It's 4.4. So there were quite a few receivers in the league this year that were high volume targets and still had more yards after the catch than JSN. But it is worth noting that he's still in the top half here because it's 14 and there are like 38 receivers that made the cut for this number of targets, I believe. So still doing fairly well here, but this isn't necessarily like his greatest his greatest category. Now, if you go yards per route run, this is where JSN shines. He's only behind Puka. And JSN and Puka, by the way, they are lapping the field. They are dominating everybody else. Zay Flowers is over a yard behind JSN. And you can see how close JSN and Puka are. And then the big drop off to like 2.5 yards. JSN 3.62 yards per route run. Absolutely ridiculous stuff what these two guys did this year. Average depth of target, if you take a look at these high volume receivers again, there was a time where JSN would have been right near the top here, but as the year went on, he kind of went down more to the middle. 11.7 yards average depth of target, still good, still fine, but he was no longer some big time downfield threat the way that he was earlier this year. And the way Seattle adjusted their offense, I think that it's well within expectations and well within reason why that would happen. And to get to one that's actually really good, if you sort by drops, you've got a couple guys here with only 1, and then a couple guys with 2, and then JSN with 3. So JSN not really dropping passes here, as we can see. He's got 3 drops on the year. And there are 5 players that had fewer drops than him. If you go by drop percentage, you can see that he's 4th. The only guys who have fewer are A.J. Brown, who I guess saved all of his drops for the playoffs. That's kind of wild. Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs. So JSN also with the great hands, bringing in pretty much everything that hits him in the hands. If you continue to slide on over here, just looking through all these different fun categories that Pro Football Focus gives you, contested catch, JSN didn't get a ton of contested catch opportunities, only 26, which is 14th most, but contested catches made, he was 10th with 15, so almost 1 contested catch a game. His contested catch percentage was 5th in the NFL. So he was very good in those situations. He just didn't get as many opportunities at it as some of these other guys, which again, we don't throw the ball that much. All right. The last thing that I think is really fun to look at here would be missed tackles forced. And JSN actually did better here than I would have thought. 18 missed tackles forced by JSN this year, 5th most, behind only Puka, Chase, Shakir, and Pickens. So JSN, obviously not the biggest player in the world, not the most elusive player. He's not like a Dante Hall, but finds ways to make tacklers miss. Excuse me. So it would be a little bit less impressive if you did miss tackles forced per catch because he had so many catches. It still illustrates that he's kind of redefining himself this year as a player, and it's been great to see. All right. So that's some of the top line stuff that I think is pretty fun when you're trying to take a look at how JSN stacks up with the rest of the league. But let's go down to receiving depth stuff here. And this is kind of like what they did in yesterday's video, the Sam Darnold video, where they separate out who are the most effective players by area of the field. So this is deep, which is 20 yards or more down the field. So this takes a look at receivers when they're at least 20 yards away from the line of scrimmage when they get targeted. So you can take a look and see who are the players that get targeted the most in this situation. It's Chris Olave by a pretty good margin, Alec Pierce, Cortland Sutton, and then JSN. Now, if you go by percentage, JSN's actually pretty far down because he gets targeted so much. Of course, that number of targets is really not going to stand out. He's actually down at a 36th out of 40. So his percentage of getting targeted downfield is very low. Now, if you sort by number of catches, and this is where it's kind of amazing, he leads the league in catches on downfield passes. More than 20 yards down the field, 16 of them. Almost one a game. You sort by reception percentage, he is number one, 61.5%. Sort by yards, he's the first by a long shot, over 600 yards. Nobody else is over 500. You go by yards per catch, there are a few guys ahead of him, obviously, but JSN is 5th. Nearly 40 yards per catch on these downfield targets. So when it comes to getting targeted deep down the field, you can even sort by yak. He's number one in terms of yak on these catches. He's no drops on these targets, by the way. Absolutely crazy stuff what he's doing out there. He was probably, in terms of efficiency and effectiveness, the best deep ball catcher in football this year. You go to intermediate, leads the league in targets on intermediate passes. Doesn't quite come up near the top in target percentage here, but still pretty good. Still 13th, 37.6 is still pretty good, pretty solid. You sort by number of catches. He is first by far, 43 catches. Second place is 31. Reception percentage, he is second behind only Puka. So despite being the most highly targeted intermediate receiver, which is 10 to 19 yards down the field, he is second in terms of catch percentage. Remarkable. Go by total number of yards. He's got almost 100 yards on second place. You go by touchdowns. Leads the league in touchdowns on intermediate passes. Yards per reception, he's somewhere around the middle, about 17th. So not necessarily remarkable there. But you take a look at these numbers, man. You take a look at all the stuff that he did on these intermediate throws. Really, really remarkable. The only thing that isn't really stand out here would be his yak, only 3.3 yards per catch in yak on these intermediate routes. But still, man. And by the way, all three of his drops were on intermediate throws. But he was the most highly used intermediate receiver in football. Now, you go to short, which is 0 to 9 yards from the line of scrimmage. This is where JSN's usage really starts to go down. He only got targeted there 58 times, which is tied for 12th most in the NFL. In terms of number of catches, he was 11th, which is good, but it doesn't really stand out all that well. Catch percentage, he is 8th. He is 8th, 79.3, which is good, very good, but it's not elite. Doesn't make him one of the best receivers in the league by itself. Total yards, 7th, again, perfectly fine. 1 touchdown, 9 yards per catch, which is, again, perfectly fine. But this is definitely where the you lose a little bit of the shine the closer you get to the line of scrimmage. And I'm totally cool with that, of course, because I think that there are more important things for a receiver to do. But it is worth noting that this was not his best area this year. It's kind of crazy we're here too, because if you had asked me what I thought about JSN, when we drafted him, I would have said intermediate and short stuff is going to be his bread and butter, but he has really become a deadly downfield threat. You go by receiving depth here. You short, or I'm sorry, no, this I'm sorry. Is this I don't know how that happened, but behind line of scrimmage, just to bring it all the way home here. This is of course behind the line. JSN doesn't even really qualify here. This is only players that were targeted at least 19 times behind the line of scrimmage. You'd have to expand it out significantly to include JSN here. And you can see that only 10 players qualified by this qualification here. So not really a part of his game. So there's not going to be much to say there. And when you do expand it out a little bit, when you go to like 20% here, he does show up. Oh, I'm sorry. He does show up, but he's pretty far down the list, and he was not very productive on those targets either. He was like less than 100 total yards on the season. And I don't know why it's taking so long to reload, but again, whatever. I'm not really here to take a look at this. Yeah, it was 54 yards on 14 targets. So not his expertise, but still, I guess 54 yards is better than no yards. Continuing on down the line here. Yeah, this was behind the line of scrimmage. So slot. I already talked a little bit about this, but slot. So when JSN lined up in the slot, he had a grand total, and this is another really cool thing PFF does. They will break out a player's production by whether they're lining up in the slot or they're lining up outside. JSN had 31 targets and 25 catches when lined up in the slot, 328 yards and 2 touchdowns. All the production he had this year, and only 328 yards of it came when he was in the slot. Cooper Kupp was targeted more in the slot than JSN was this year. Just to kind of illustrate how much he changed and evolved as a player in 2025. He did not even lead his own team in slot targets. And I'm not saying Cooper Kupp had a bad season, but I think we all understand that this is a very different player, and we used him in a very specific way here, and he wasn't getting targeted that much, and still he got targeted more out of the slot than JSN did. Now, when JSN did line up in the slot, he averaged over 10 yards per target, so he was still effective. But the point I'm trying to make here is that such a small percentage of what he did came out of the slot this year. It's almost unbelievable. So definitely wanted to make a point to illustrate that. I know it's something I've talked about all year, but I don't think enough can be made of how big that transformation is. Okay, one last thing before we get on out of here on JSN. One last thing I want to talk about: receiving versus scheme. So this is something that we as Seahawks fans have talked about a lot this year. Earlier this year, teams were trying to defend JSN with man coverage, and they were getting destroyed. So they went to zone. So that was obviously the narrative. Now, obviously, JSN isn't bad against zone. I mean, he's not really bad against anything. If he was bad against anything, then teams would do that and he wouldn't be as productive. So let's take a look at what PFF has to say. Now, they segment out each player's targets based on the coverage they were facing. Sometimes they can't tell what the coverage is, so not every target will be accounted for here. But let's start with man defense here. So JSN had 32% of his targets against man coverage this year, according to PFF, right? 32%. And on against man, 25 catches, 428 yards, 4 touchdowns. So that seems like a fairly small percentage, right? But here's the thing, and this is where PFF gets a little bit confused, I think, or it becomes a little bit confusing to use them. If you go over here to target percentage by zone, they have 33.9, and then they have over 100 total targets. So at first blush, you're thinking that that target percentage means that that's like the way it's divvied out for that specific player. It's not. So that's one thing that when you look at this, you might get a little bit confused. It doesn't make sense. And you're right, it doesn't. So this is 107 targets against zone, JSN 80 catches, 1,200 yards, 6 touchdowns. And then you go back over to the man stuff, and you can see the percentages do not make any sense. 31 targets, 25 catches, 428 yards, 4 touchdowns. You can calculate the percentage from that. And you can see it still doesn't add up to 157 targets. And that's because there are a few targets where they don't know what the defense was. But nevertheless, you can actually see that in terms of on a per target basis, JSN was actually kind of equally productive against zone and man. It really isn't all that different. There is, I think, a little bit of a difference here, and there's a reason why Seattle's offense has seen more zone lately, but it's not really what you would expect, I think. All right, so that will do it for this video. Went longer than I wanted to, but I'm okay with that. See you guys later. Go Hawks. Everybody have a good rest of your day. More videos soon.